We just saw how Nora and Zion found that secular primes and religious primes equally increased generous giving behavior, prosociality. He also wanted to investigate, do all religions concern themselves with moral behavior? Is moral behavior really what religion is all about, and what they all aim to regulate? In fact, we covered several examples of how some religions in small-scale societies aren't concerned 100% with moral matters. Small-scale societies are less likely than large anonymous societies to have one big god concerned with morality. Why might that be? Researchers theorize that the values in life domains under the watch of deities are linked to the size of the communities that worship them. So people who are in small-scale societies, they get to engage in a lot more face-to-face interactions. And this allows for local norms to be established for settling arguments about who hurt who, or what allocation is fair or favorable. And there are well-functioning systems of reciprocity and kin-altruism to govern allocations. These rules don't need to be encoded in religious law. In large-scale societies, people track and manage anonymous crowds. So people need to rely on the rule of law and contractual agreements and the watchful eye of one God, whose rules are understood by everyone in the group, helps to maintain order and influence behavior at this larger scale. Finally, we covered the third question: is religion necessary for morality? And we looked at a series of studies by Saslow and colleagues, and I'm going to go over study 2 and 3, which are representative of the findings. In study 2, the researchers tested whether induced feelings of compassion in the lab, rather than self-reports about being compassionate, they actually did in study 1, would affect their giving behavior differently if they were not religious compared to whether they were more religious. They measured prosociality as behavior in the dictator game, and more prosociality was considered being more likely to give half your endowment, so about $5 out of $10 in the dictator game. In the lab, more and less religious people were placed in either the compassion induction condition or the neutral condition. So in the compassion induction condition, the participants saw a movie about child poverty, and it was sort of a series of pictures of helpless and vulnerable children and sad music in the background. And in the neutral control video, 2 men are just talking. This graph shows what happened to giving on the y-axis when participants who were more or less religious, dotted line more religious, solid line less religious, watched the compassion video on the right or the neutral video on the left on the x-axis. These results are similar to what we saw in the first study by this team. More religious people were more pro-social on average, and compassion didn't seem to matter. They gave more after the compassion induction and after the neutral video than the lowest givers, who were less religious individuals in that neutral condition. But you can see less religious individuals did get quite a bump in their giving from the compassion video. So they were able to induce compassion and see an effect on the less religious, but not the more religious people. Likewise, looking at a measure of state compassion and looking at that in comparison to religion, they again saw in study 3 that the more religious actually didn't have an effect of state compassion. So lower and higher state compassion, more religious people were pretty pro-social. Their giving was relatively high. Whereas people who were less religious, when they had lower state compassion, their giving was substantially lower compared to when they had higher state compassion. So again, compassion seems to be having a stronger effect on less religious people, but both less religious and more religious people do have the capacity to be generous. So is religion necessary for morality? These studies indicate that it's not, but religious people do seem to give more from the get-go. They don't need compassion triggers. They're less affected by compassion feelings when it comes to being pro-social. Less religious people might give less on average, but they can be influenced to give more, sometimes the most, by inducing feelings of compassion. Here's a question. Researchers have explored the relationship between religion and morality with a range of methodologies. What is the convergent finding across this research? 1. Religiousness and moral behavior are not related. 2. Moral behavior is prevented by religion, which imposes an us versus them mindset. 3. Moral behavior is present in less and more religious people under different conditions. People who are more religious feel less compassion. The correct answer here is 3. Moral behavior is present in less and more religious people under different conditions. And what were those conditions? For less religious people, inductions of compassion or higher state trait compassion was associated with more pro-social giving. For more religious people, the compassion induction and compassion feelings didn't affect their pro-social giving, which was consistently relatively high.